Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Monday, the 16th of September in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Secret Service agents foil an apparent second assassination attempt targeting Donald Trump. We have the latest.
An uninjured Trump says his resolve is stronger than ever after the latest twist in a chaotic US election campaign.
Plus, China's deepening slowdown as calls grow for major stimulus, with more economic data disappointing.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. A man has been arrested after what appears to be a second assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump, this time at his Florida golf club. The suspect is in custody has been identified by federal officials as 58-year-old Ryan Routh, who has 8 arrests on his record, apparently for minor offences. Palm Beach County Sheriff Rick Bradshaw says that a Secret Service agent who was patrolling the golf course ahead of Trump as he played spotted the barrel of a gun.
The Secret Service agent that was on the course did a fantastic job. What they do is they have an agent that jumps one hole ahead of time to where the president was at. And he was able to spot this rifle barrel sticking out of the fence and immediately engage that individual, at which time the individual took off.
Rick Bradshaw was joined at the press conference by Rafael Barros, the special agent in charge for the Secret Service's Miami field office.
Our agents engaged. We are not sure right now if the individual was able to take a shot at our agents, but for sure our agents were able to engage with the subject.
Rafael Barros spoke at a press conference in which officers also revealed that they found an AK-47 style rifle, 2 rucksacks and a GoPro camera near to where the suspect was spotted. Police say that the man fled, and based on a description of the suspect's vehicle, he was subsequently stopped and taken into custody by police whilst driving on a nearby highway.
In a text to supporters, Donald Trump later wrote, "My resolve is stronger after another attempt on my life." The FBI says it's now taken over the investigation, with the incident marking a second apparent attempt on the Republican presidential candidate's life in 2 months. In July, Trump was shot in the ear during an outdoor rally in Pennsylvania. That incident prompted criticism of the Secret Service and led to the resignation of the agency's director. Bloomberg political contributor Jeannie Sheehan-Wazeno says the latest attempt will raise further scrutiny.
The number one question people are asking is, 2 months after the president was the victim of an attempted assassination in Pennsylvania, how is it that somebody got an AK-47 within what the FBI said is 400 to 500 yards of him on a golf course? So I am racking my brain to figure out if in American history we have had a candidate and former president who has been the victim of an attempted assassination not once but twice within 2 months on the campaign trail.
That's Jeannie Sheehan-Wazeno. The White House said in a statement that President Biden and Vice President Harris were briefed about the security incident at Trump's golf course and were relieved to know he's safe. In a post on her X account, Kamala Harris said she was deeply disturbed by the possible assassination attempt, adding that violence has no place in America.
Now to news elsewhere. Pressure is building on Chinese authorities to ramp up fiscal and monetary stimulus in a bid to hit the country's growth target of 5%. That's after recent data showed Chinese industrial output on its longest slowing streak since 2021, with consumption and investment also weakening more than expected last month. Hours before the data was released, the Chinese central bank signalled that fighting deflation would become a higher priority, indicating more monetary easing ahead. Banks including Goldman Sachs, Citigroup and Morgan Stanley have downgraded their Chinese growth forecast for this year.
After lowering borrowing costs for the first time in more than 4 years in August, Bank of England policymakers are expected to stick to a cautious approach this week, but some investors think more aggressive action is needed. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has the story.
While Governor Andrew Bailey and his colleagues are expected to delay cutting rates further this week, investors are betting on a change of tactic. Money managers, including Allianz and Aviva, think the central bank's caution won't last long in the face of an economic slowdown and a tax-raising budget. But with this week's incoming data expected to show resurgent services inflation, policymakers aren't likely to change their careful tone. Markets are currently anticipating a rate hold this week before a quarter-point cut in November and another in December. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Well, the view from investors comes at the start of a long-anticipated US easing cycle, which takes centre stage this week. It's part of a 36-hour monetary roller coaster that includes policy decisions from Brazil, South Africa, the UK and Japan. There has been a debate about whether the Fed will go for 25 or 50 basis points in terms of a rate cut. Fed fund futures are now pricing in about a 60% chance of a 50 basis point Fed cut this week. The Bank of Japan is expected to keep rates on hold.
Keir Starmer is in Rome to seek support for Britain's push to arm Ukraine with long-range weapons that can hit Russia. The UK Prime Minister will meet the Italian leader, Giorgia Meloni, as part of a broader diplomatic push to get Western allies on board with the plan. Vladimir Putin says approval would risk bringing NATO into the war, but the UK's Foreign Secretary David Lammy says the Russian leader is trying to intimidate the West.
Putin said, don't send any missiles. We sent them. Putin threatens every few months to use nuclear weapons. It's totally unacceptable. We won't be bullied by Putin's shameless grandstanding. What he should now do is cease his aggression and leave Ukraine.
David Lammy adds Starmer's visit is about rebuilding ties to European nations which were damaged by Brexit. The trip comes as Starmer battles various domestic headaches, including controversial winter fuel allowance cuts and questions over the declaration of gifts.
Now to flooding across Europe. Days of heavy rain have caused some of the worst flooding in decades across Central and Eastern Europe. Deaths have been reported in Poland, Romania and Austria, with other people still missing in the Czech Republic. The Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has asked his finance minister to prepare emergency aid, and Poland will also ask for European aid. People in Poland have been told to stock up on food and prepare for power outages. Now, in a moment, we're going to be talking about the economic picture in China after a huge data dump over the weekend that again highlighted the concerns around economic growth and reaching that 5% target that the Chinese government has for economic growth. But let's go to our top story now and bring you all of the details and what we know so far, what the FBI is describing as an apparent assassination attempt on former US President Donald Trump. Trump was not hurt in the incident which took place on his golf course in Florida. Our senior editor Bill Ferries is with us throughout the morning. Bill, good morning. What do we know then about the man behind this shooting?
Well, the man that the authorities detained on the highway a couple hours north of West Palm Beach, where Trump's golf course is, 58-year-old man has been recently believed to be living in Hawaii, has a long history going back more than 20 years with law enforcement. NBC News reported, based on court documents, that he was once convicted of owning a machine gun, was charged in a hit-and-run attack, and has had a few other incidents, interactions with law enforcement over the years. More recently, he's actually been quite worked up about the war in Ukraine and has been talking about trying to recruit foreign fighters. He actually did an interview with the New York Times at one point last year where he talked about having visited Ukraine after Russia's invasion. So as someone with a pretty complex history, it's not known what his political beliefs are or what grievances he may have had, but Secret Service apparently spotted him as they were one hole ahead of the president on the golf course. They spotted a rifle poking through a fence. Secret Service engaged with the person there, but didn't hit him. That person fled in a car and was pulled over on the side of the highway a couple hours later. So there's obviously going to be a big investigation into, how this man, Ryan Ralph, found himself in that situation, whether there was more that could be done. But a lot of early praise coming for that Secret Service agent who spotted the rifle in the fence line.
Yeah, indeed, that's an interesting contrast to how the previous assassination attempt was handled, which, of course, had been extremely controversial for the Secret Service.
Right. With that attempted assassination on Donald Trump a couple months ago, you had a lot of questions immediately being asked about why or how a shooter could have gotten onto the roof of a building not that far from where the former president was speaking, with a direct line of sight of the stage. There was some confusion in terms of between how the Secret Service was working with the local police. And you, of course, had the director of the Secret Service resign in the aftermath of all that. That episode is still being subject to an investigation by a bipartisan group in Congress. I suspect there will be a similar type of investigation into this now that it appears to be the second attempted assassination on Donald Trump in just about 2 months.
What are the other reactions that we've seen from politicians and others?
Well, we saw, the president saying a former President Trump coming out very quickly saying he won't back down, he won't surrender, he's going to, keep pushing his campaign. We've seen comments from the White House, both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, saying that there's no room for political violence in the United States, and saying they're grateful that former President Trump wasn't hurt in this episode. I think there's going to be a big question when you look at the politics of this in the coming days, whether there's any kind of a sympathy boost for the former president in the election. And then it's been a very difficult past week for President Trump in terms of his debate performance Tuesday. This does allow him and the Republican Party to potentially turn the page and maybe focus on some of their strengths in the campaign to get past discussion of the debate, and of course that discussion about whether immigrants are eating people's pets in Ohio, something that had been a big distraction for Republicans the past several days.
Yeah, indeed. Bill, thanks very much for bringing us your analysis this morning. That's our senior editor, Bill Ferries there.
Now to China. An array of economic data is showing that growth is heading in one direction, and that is downwards. Numbers out over the weekend came in even lower than many economists had expected. The deterioration is raising questions about whether the state needs a bigger stimulus plan and if it might miss the state-mandated growth target. Joining us now to discuss is Bloomberg's Rebecca Chung-Wilkins, our Asia government and politics correspondent. Rebecca, good morning. Just take us through then the sluggish economy that China has seen and what the data over the weekend told us.
Thanks, Caroline. Yes, I happened to be working actually on Saturday, and I can tell you it was not your average Saturday bureau shift. There was a slew of really quite negative economic data. A couple of standouts. We saw industrial output marking its longest slowing streak since 2021. We also had consumption, investment. They came in weaker than expected. One sort of small highlight that I thought was interesting was the M1 supply. This essentially shows how much currency is in circulation. That declined. We saw the lowest level since 1996, again suggesting the sort of low demand from consumers, as low willingness. And credit data also came in relatively weak too. So in some ways, just reinforcing that very negative backdrop that we had when GDP came in for the last quarter at 4.7%. The majority of economists that Bloomberg tracks were already expecting China to miss the target of around 5.5%. And we've had these sort of wording from Xi Jinping that perhaps some interpret it as signaling a tolerance for maybe achieving something lower than 5%. But it's worth saying that even if we come in at 4.8, 4.7, maybe even 4.6, I mean, Beijing could still argue that they reached that target of around 5.
What are the options open to the Chinese authorities now to perhaps address this, to do more to support the economy?
Well, China has so far, as we've discussed many times, been really hesitant to bring in, what investors have wanted, a sort of big bazooka stimulus. On the other hand, they're also trying to balance the hefty debt loads that local governments are dealing with right now as well. But one thing that has caught my eye is the PBOC came out with quite a rare statement alongside their credit data, essentially highlighting the worries about deflation, saying that it's an important consideration and that they will try and create a modest rebound in prices, or at the very least maintain the stability around prices. And it does suggest perhaps a shift in thinking, or at least in some cohorts of the top echelons, around how they're worrying about deflationary pressures. There was one point at which, sometimes you would get commentary from state officials saying that deflation was a good thing because it was lowering prices and things were becoming more affordable for people. And that has been a worry for some investors who have been, concerned that policymakers aren't taking some of those deflationary risks seriously enough. And of course, the longer that deflation goes on for, the more sort of impenetrable and the more expensive that problem becomes to fix.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.